Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well this evening. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, a critical look at Canada's role abroad, a weekly look going on about 3 and a bit years. I'm Yves Engler coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And I think I'll get right to it. Um, this week is the 200th anniversary, I guess, if you want it, of France forcing Haiti to pay a massive debt ransom uh, to recognize its independence. And it was on this April 17th is considered the 200-year anniversary. I didn't it wasn't on my radar. Um, but I didn't realize this 200th anniversary till saw a piece in Le Devoir, which was kind of interesting, from the Haitian, sort of leftish Haitian Canadian author. I'm forgetting her name right now. She's also on CBC and Radio Canada. Uh, but uh, she said that in this Caribbean format forum, where there's some Caribbean countries sort of siding with Haiti over repaying this, Bob Ray made a comment that sort of suggested Canada supported restitution. And of course, this debt took 122 years for Haiti to repay. It's considered it was multiple times more than the initial 150 million francs, multiple times more than what the U.S. paid for the Louisiana Purchase from France, which at that point, I think it close to doubled the size of the U.S. at that point. And I seen conflicting things on that. I heard that the Louisiana Purchase was 15 million francs, and that was in 1803. And then in 1825, they pressed Haiti to pay 150 million. Ultimately, that was reduced to 90 million. So that was something like 10 times the cost of the Louisiana Purchase, obviously a few decades later, so maybe some inflation, but still multiple times more. It was way more than Haiti's government budget. And this has nothing to do with reparations for slavery, enslavement, but this is just literally to recognize its independence. Those who had won their freedom from slavery and independence were pressed with gunboats to repay this. And I've never seen a Canadian government that's ever said Canada should or France should repay Haiti. Uh, the Bob Ray quote seems to be going a little bit in that direction, his comment, but it's far from a clear statement on the matter. And there's lots of comments of Canadian officials praising French values and during the time when Haiti was still repaying this debt, and obviously more recently. Um, I did an interview with uh, um, Jeffrey Haiti, Jean Saville about this and Canada's ties. And of course, one of the reasons they ousted Aristide in 2004 was because his government had pushed for France to repay. And also with regards to Haiti, this week the Travis Ross published a piece on Canada Files about how Canada is involved with the US involved in training Haitian police on drone warfare. So they're now using drones in their fight against the gangs that control much of Port-au-Prince. And apparently there's some the there's a a PNH, a Police Nationale d'Haïti unit, a drone unit that's based out of the U.S. Embassy, apparently, and Canada's involved in this training process. This is a pretty big escalation. I don't think that drone warfare against gangs is a particularly good idea, even though, of course, there is a big problem with gang power. The Globe had a piece, I actually think it was last Saturday that I just read, so I've read subsequently, where Dominique Anglade, who was the former head of the Liberal Party here in Quebec, who's of Haitian, her parents were important Haitian Montrealers. They sort of, I think her dad was kind of considered to have one of the founders of the sociology at the Université de Québec à Montréal at UQAM. And uh, she's urging for a UN mission in Haiti, and basically saying there's not enough foreign forces in the country. So getting pushed again in the Canadian media. But of course, the media, this only mention of the 200-year anniversary of the debt of the ransom, which the New York Times suggested was somewhere between 40 and over 100 billion. That was the cost to Haiti. That was to repay it. Uh, the there's no, besides this column in Le Devoir, there's nothing in the Canadian media about this 200-year anniversary. I mean, this is one of the more egregious, if not maybe even the most egregious, um, uh, imperial post-independence imperial crimes in certainly in last hundreds of years. Uh, and obviously plays some role in understanding the impoverishment of Haiti. The Ottawa Citizen published a story titled "D&D Stalling Its Review of F-35 Deal," and basically Mark Carney called for a review of the purchase of 88 Lockheed Martin fighter jets, and the department, the DND, which wants to keep the F-35, of course, they're the ones who are pushing it from the get-go. They are apparently sort of dragging their feet in looking into the matter, which is not a surprise, but is obviously contrary to the political demand, and also very contrary to the sort of ethos. Sorry, I had a request to play hide and seek, which I will not be able to do for a little bit. Um, and so, so of course, the F-35 and having the U.S. have a sort of an off switch, a lot of control over the Canadian fighter jets. That goes against Donald Trump's threats and gives a lot of leverage to the U.S. Uh, the Esprit du Corps had a story in a similar vein around the Canadian Surface Combatant, which is 80 billion up front, something like 300 billion over the life cycle, the biggest procurement in Canadian history. And the title of the story, I think, is "Put Canadian Defence Systems into Canadian Surface Combatant. U.S. control over various systems on the Royal Canadian Navy ships is a threat." And they quote someone saying that most of the key elements of the CSC warships are U.S. built and U.S. controlled. So even though it's Irving Shipping in the Atlantic that has the is building them, the all the key systems are Lockheed, and that was a choice that was made, and there's now increasingly some questioning of whether that is a acceptable decision. The Globe had a story about the Conservatives' military pledge. Headline: Conservatives pledge Northern Canadian military bases, surveillance planes. So I think they're now saying they want three different bases in the north, more surveillance planes. The story kind of points out an interesting point, which I have mentioned previously, which is that, as the story says, as recently as last year, Mr. Poilievre would not commit to raising defense spending to the NATO target of 2%. But the Conservative Party recently took the pledge in responding to a survey from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress lobby group that included a question about spending target. So they formally have now agreed to the 2%. So the Conservatives are kind of late in this. I think the NDP had actually officially endorsed the 2% before the Conservatives. It's also interesting that it comes via the Ukrainian Canadian Congress poll or survey, election survey, which I think tells you a bit about the Ukrainian Canadian Congress being an advocate for greater military spending, just sort of effectively across the board. It becomes just sort of a militarist a lobby group, even though, of course, it's ostensibly just focused on Ukraine, but it's of course a NATO aligned lobby organization, and so becomes sort of just a generally a militaristic lobby organization. And in the debate, the question that was asked of Poilievre on the Ukraine, I thought was kind of an interesting dynamic, where he was asked, "Would you continue to support Ukraine?" And Poilievre's response was yes, and then just completely pivots to uh, the increased support for Canadian military, northern bases, more resources for those in the armed forces. And then Steve Paikin kind of responds to him saying, "I'm not sure I really got an answer." And then Polyev kind of retorts, "Well, I said yes." So there's an interesting dynamic there because there's some of the base of Polyev isn't totally keen on funding, giving more money to more resources to Ukraine. So it's much safer for him to talk about investments in the Canadian military, though of course he said yes. So there's also this some element of this that's the media kind of like demanding everyone, jump up and down saying, yes, we will support Ukraine and we'll continue and it's the most important thing, we'll go to the last and this kind of stuff. So there's a little bit of that in the background, but it's also kind of a little bit of an interesting dynamic with Polyev. The New York Times a week ago, week Sunday, which I read later, has a piece. You've heard of a Cold War. Uh, this war would be hot but frigid. Basically, it's about NATO practicing or NATO training in Finland, and they quote this Canadian brigadier general who's overseeing the war game, and he says it's really only been the past 5 or 6 years that everyone's moved on from the global war on terror. Uh, Arctic nations are starting to understand the importance of the Arctic and the tension there. I thought the it was an interesting kind of contrast. It's just how these military types just move from one justification for militarism to another. For a long time was the war on terror and got to build up the military, got to spend money because of that and this and that. And then they just sort of shifts that just kind of gets left aside and has that dynamic really changed that much? Maybe, maybe not. And now it's off to the Arctic and the danger of the Arctic, and now we got to increase military spending because of the Arctic, and is China or Russia coming over the Arctic and this and that. I thought the comment, the brigadier, and this is also gets into this whole, who's the aggressor, right? Canada's got troops training all around Russia, all and that's all sort of kind of left aside. There was a story, I think it was in the Globe, about a Dutch city celebrates 80 years of freedom, and they talk about Canada's role in World War II. And it got me just sort of thinking about how, do you ever see any of these sort of like, 15 years after Libya and that city is still destroyed, commemoration of Canada's role in destroying that city, or, like the commemorations almost in the dominant media, almost by definition, laudatory of Canada's role, right? It's basically almost never any sort of like commemoration from a war crime, destruction, imperial act. That's just it's all in a sort of celebratory, nationalistic, we are righteous. that element is very important in shaping consciousness of Canada's foreign policy. Uh, I guess maybe a little bit counter to what I just said there. La Presse yesterday published a couple stories on the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, if you like, uh, around Vietnam, and a little bit about Canada's role in Vietnam. About this group of Quebecers who volunteered in the U.S. military and how they interview them. They meet up. They got some like monthly meeting, and they talk stories about fighting in Vietnam or whatever. It's not portrayed negatively at all. I think Vietnam War has gotten it's just sort of implicitly there's a negative, and so talking about how Canada was involved, it brings somewhat of a negative look, but it's not actually negative. And Canada's role in Vietnam is really under discussed, and they just touch the surface of it in the article. But there was tens of thousands of Canadians that fought. There was Canadian officials through the International Control Commission were assisting. They were basically representing the West, represent the U.S. In what was supposed to be ending the conflict, but they actually, legitimated and spied for the Americans, and then they delivered bombing threats to the North Vietnamese, which then, the Americans, of course, bombed North Vietnam and killed 100,000 plus doing so. Uh, and so there's all these different ways Canada participated in the Vietnam War that's sort of not widely discussed. The Globe had a piece last Saturday that I only read subsequently, which was just a kind of remarkable, and it was picked up by variations of it are picked up elsewhere. The Globe headline was Liberal candidate accepted invite to celebrate People's Liberation Army event. And it's the replacement for the Liberal candidate, Paul, is it Paul Chu, who got ousted because he made that joke about the bounty on a conservative, uh, the Chinese authorities in Hong Kong offering a payment to apprehend the conservative candidate, who's this Hong Kong activist, and so he got turfed, and he dropped, whether, I mean, I think his joke was not a very politically correct joke. Whether he should have been removed or not, I think that's maybe up for discussion. But the the Globe piece is about his replacement, who I'm blanking on his name, and they've really gone after him over the past few days. He's a former Toronto police officer, and this story about him going to the 70th anniversary of China's defeating Japan during World War II, they make this a big scandal. This happened 10 years ago when he was a Toronto police officer, and he was sort of quasi representing the Toronto police at this ceremony. The ceremony also had Guy Saint-Jacques, was then the Canadian ambassador, who's a real China hawk. He's quoted regularly, criticizing China in the Canadian media. And they basically make a big, like this was like some sort of like questionable thing he did. Well, of course, Canada was, the Japanese were allied with the Nazis and Mussolini, and we were fighting the Japanese during World War II, right? So like he's in a sense he's going to mark a ceremony of Canada's side during World War II. And they do this whole thing of like Tiananmen Square. I guess the ceremony like happened in Tiananmen Square, and it's like, like imagine someone going to like Nathan Phillips Square in Toronto, and like going to some like ceremony there. Like they make it all like this sort of it's all so, politicized, and that comes up in, Canadian thinking is this like, oh, he was just this like he's just a servant of the Chinese government, and he's gone off, and that's just what they're trying to portray. But it's like he was literally like a Toronto police officer going to commemorate the side that Canada fought with during World War II. And now, 10 years later, this is like being used against him as part of this like this total xenophobia during the election. And I just did an interview with Alex Terrell, the Green Party leader, about this in part based on him. He's going on a trip to China and talking a little bit of his trip and talking a little bit about this climate. And like at the leadership debate, the Rebel News has this truck portraying these messages about Mark Carney being a more loyal to China than to Canada. That's one of the messages. The other one was saying he's an asset of the Chinese Communist Party, and there's all these like messages about like how he defended Paul Chu. That was the candidate that was forced out in Markham in the Toronto area, and and it's just this like real hard. So you have on one hand you have the Rebel News crowd going like this hard, like Mark Carney is just a asset of the Chinese government, loyal to China, not to Canada. And then you have the slightly more sophisticated people at the Globe and Mail who are like going at these like former Toronto police officers of Chinese descent who are just basically, I mean, let's get down to it. They're basically just not just like anti-China hawks, right? That's really what the issue is. It's not that they have, some associations with, I mean, first of all, it's, they have some association with China. It's a big country. It's a, increasingly wealthy country. They have some, a familial, I'm sure, and or other connections, and they just don't want to go full on into the China's all bad, whatever kind of line. And so there's just this whole attacks. Another one in the Journal National, and the title was Malaise autour d'un événement partisan libéral à Brossard. And so it was a Liberal Party event in Brossard, suburb of Montreal, where this councillor, city councillor Brossard, who's accused of being part of the Chinese police stations, the two ones that the RCMP made a big kerfuffle about, and then they've never put any evidence about it. Huge media thing, and there's just like nothing. The one of them here in Chinatown, not far from where I am, where I know people who were like the former heads and been, activist people who've been engaged in all kinds of different issues from Palestine to the climate crisis to whatever, who are, players there who've been active there. Uh, uh, they they just have all these accusations brought against them. They like because of that the banks won't loan them money. They basically sabotage the community center, and so here you have this elected official who's accused of being who's said to be like involved in these community centers where they're accusing of being like Chinese police stations. It's like nothing's really ever been presented, and so now this is like well this elected official was attended a liberal event, and so therefore this whole liberal event is now like questionable, it's like all a Chinese plot, like what it's just all pretty remarkable to see, and it just keeps coming. And what's I find particularly remarkable about it is it just keeps coming amidst the fact that obviously, you have this Donald Trump annexation, you have this whole like this onslaught from the US, tariff, other, and it doesn't stop. And like again, I've stated many times, this whole Chinese interference business is or the whole foreign interference thing is interference, foreign interference. It's mostly the U.S. power being mobilized within Canada, very clearly and more indirectly to hype up Chinese interference as part of pressuring Canada to join the U.S.'s contain China, possibly go to war with China policy. And yet this sort of the Globe and others continue with this, even as it's obviously comedy compared to the threat of U.S. Power in Canada. And there's some degree of recognition of this, of course, in capitalist circles. So the Globe published a piece uh, Oh, yeah, it's titled Canada, We Need to Talk About China. It's in the business section, a commentary in the business page, and it's from Carlos Dade, who's interesting. He's in some think tank. Uh, Now I know him from back 20 plus years ago on Haiti related stuff. So he's clearly aligned with different power sources in the country, and he's basically saying we got to kind of reevaluate the China question. And he has a passage in there where he says, for Canada, for Ottawa, the Canadian national interest was literally and figuratively 100% US national interest. It's China policy. And he's specifically referring to like bringing in the tariffs on the electric cars and Chinese aluminum and a few other things, and just basically mimicking Biden and just completely joining that. And so there's some degree of questioning of this in capital circles. I mean, for obvious reasons that like it's the second biggest trading partner, and if the U.S. is going to be threatening and refusing, bringing in tariffs and the like, obviously turning towards China has to be part of the mix um, from a strictly business perspective. But politically, there's just so little space for that because there's this whole onslaught of anti-China kind of sentiment. Uh, Samira Mohideen, she posted that um, the Shah, the son of the former Shah of Iran, Pavli Reza, is apparently speaking in Toronto, is coming to Toronto on May 26th, and he's being sponsored by the Tafsik organization, which is this like ultra Zionist group, which is interesting, just how down the path the opposition of the Iranian outside of the country opposition has gone with the Zionist organizations, which of course would have very, very little um, support within Iran, but they have clearly aligned with these forces trying to Israeli forces that are potentially seeking regime change and the like. This week there was the debate, the Wednesday and Thursday night, the election debate. I went down. It was at the CBC building, not far from where I am, and I went down both days, and I was able to do have a couple little interviews that were kind of interesting. Justin Ling, I got Steve Paikin on the Thursday, who was the debate moderator. As he was going in, I uh, I asked him to ask about the genocide in Gaza and uh, the the debate. Rebel News, very interesting to see the Rebel News stuff on the debate. They were very present uh, outside the security zone. I saw them inside the security zone. I then saw uh, images and heard about them being like kind of all over inside. They dominated the questions. They won a legal battle a few years ago, forcing the debate commission to allow them in. If I would have known about this, if I would have been more on top of it, you needed to register 5 days in advance to get inside. I don't know if they would have um, granted me access, and even if they would have granted me access, I'm pretty sure the police were all over me. The RCMP police were all over me there, so they're pretty sure that the police would have still blocked it, even if I actually was, registered. Um, But I think Rebel News did a fantastic job of kind of hijacking a lot of it. They got control of a lot of the questions on the first night. It led to the cancellation of the questions on the Thursday. And it got me kind of going on this whole like where's the left Rebel News? Right? Where's the left, the sort of socialist, internationalist, anti-racist, ecologically minded, um, kind of, call it street journalism, call it gotcha journalism. I think a lot of the stuff I've done, that's kind of what it is. I of course is focus. entirely, almost entirely on foreign policy, and a good left rebel news would be dealing with many more issues than not just the foreign policy issues. Um, but it got really going how like it's crazy. There's like no left kind of like video media in Canada. So little. And I got also like I had like tons of my videos picked up. Either they ask me or they just take it by like Palestine Online and Mint Press and even like Al Jazeera and RT and the Turkish TRT and other all kinds of places international sort of smaller and bigger kind of whatever state ones that have taken different clips of mine. I don't think there's any left media that I know of that's ever taken any of the video clips of different social media questioning and stuff like that. And there's a need. I mean, to set up a left, a rebel, a left rebel news is just, I mean, we totally should be doing it. And one of the things that got me going on this was I saw the David Menzies, who's the Rebel News correspondent. He was there. He's like filming. There was on the first night there was about 30, 40 Palestine people protesting. There was liberal supporters, conservatives, some Bloc Québécois, some other. But probably the biggest group was the Palestine, certainly the loudest. And so he's doing some sort of clip, and I walk across the street to him, and I just ask him about why does he support slaughtering Palestinian children. And this guy was like his response, in my opinion, was just like so embarrassing. He acted like he couldn't hear me. Pretty sure he heard me the first time. He made me say it like four times. He's kind of like doing this, and then he's just like totally incapable of like pivoting in any way. And he kind of comes at me with like some talking point about October 7th. And he just like both refuses to say, I don't support the slaughter of Palestinian children. But then he's just totally like comes across incapable, like thinking on his feet. And this is the guy, these are the people like Rebel News. This guy's got like 50,000 social Twitter followers. This is like, I interact with the Rebel News people here in Montreal somewhat, because I see them at press conferences, and sometimes I ask them, where, if politicians are and stuff like that. We're like kind of cordial. And these people, they have like 100,000 plus Twitter followers. The woman here, she's a bit more with it than this Menzies came across as. But still, like I've had enough conversation with her that's like come pretty much always has to come back to some sort of talking point. And like, but these people are like besting us, the left, right? Like, how is that possible? It's just like it's actually really embarrassing, to be honest with you. Like where's the sort of outlet? Like obviously, I do a lot of the foreign policy questions and stuff, but on like all kinds of questions and like there's all kinds of ways you could do it. And I think the best way to do it would be really broad, and you have a mix of everything. You have like the anti-capitalist. Like one of the things I thought about after I bumped into Mark Carney back in September. I asked him about the genocide. I just bumped into him at the Macron Trudeau thing on the street. And I asked him about the genocide, but afterwards, I like quickly after I regretted because I was like, what I should have really asked him about is like, is is capitalism compatible with ecological sustainability, right? Because he's a whole like climate capitalist, big funds and getting these big investment funds to so, and so that was really like his domain. I kind of regretted how I hadn't asked him that question, and but it's crazy. As far as I know, no one's ever asked him that question, right? So there's like, or like Amazon. Amazon, they shut down all their facilities here, the warehouses here, and the just anti-union, ridiculous anti-union thing. Has anyone gone up, like, just tried to like, stand outside the Amazon office? Well, I don't know, obviously not going to get Bezos, but like the Amazon Canada person and stuck a, phone or microphone in his face and said like, do you, was this to crush the union, or I don't know, whatever exact question, right? Or same thing, have some people hang out outside the oil offices in Calgary and go up to these CEOs and be like, are you concerned about the future of your children or your grandchildren being, because you just want to make another buck? He just goes on and on. Some of the questions, like going after like Conservative Party MPs, the more socially right wing, and go ask them about abortion, ask them about gay marriage, try to, get embarrassing, cause division within the Conservative Party. Like all this kind of like sort of call it whatever you want to call it, street journalism, this kind of stuff that's been made really easy technologically, cheap with the different, changes online, video, all this stuff. Um, yeah, anyways, I mean, I'm getting a little bit off the foreign policy stuff, but the fact, even at this really simple thing, the fact that no, as far as I know, no left media, a couple, I think Journal de Montréal did it recently. They took a clip of mine from the Richard Martineau thing on the we I asked them on the street. I think they put that into the story. They linked to it in their story. But it's like almost never that there's like English Canadian like left or for that matter French Canadian left media like publishing it. Part of it's no video, and part of it is that in fact I think that there's a whole establishment side to it. So if you go look at like Ricochet, Rabble, okay, so Ricochet, the editor she was at the Toronto Star and the Peterborough Examiner, and one of their main columnists is a former CBC person. Rabble CA is Carl Nuremberg on the Hill. They boast that Carl was at CBC for 25 years. Canadian Dimension, you got Mark Edge, who was in the province and the Calgary Herald, I think, for like 20 years. So they have this claim to like sort of journalistic respectability, which I mean, my dad worked at the Vancouver Sun. I mean, I don't know. Like, there's I get why you would, if you're going to be this sort of like left wing outlet, you would want to have claim to some degree of like professional journalist credentials. But you know, is the journalist world like actually treating the left like respectfully? Is it I mean, so yeah, like a left populist uh disruptive media. Like now, a lot of what I've done I don't think should be part of. I think some of it, the stuff I've done, goes into clear in the domain of activism versus the domain of journalism, like sort of disruptive journalism. A lot of stuff I do is in the realm of disruptive journalism, and I think that's what a left rebel should be doing. Some of that, some of it I don't think it should be doing. I think it's in a bit of a different terrain that's now just in the activism terrain, and so but yeah, I don't know what you need to get this going. You probably need three, four, $500,000. I think that would actually be doable after a couple of years of producing good stuff, and so it's a question of seed money, and that's I think the difficulty, that the advantage that the Rebel News has is that they probably get a lot of their money from individual fairly small donations, but they have seed money. They have some oil CEOs and stuff like that behind the scenes that I'm almost certain have given sort of larger sums, and it'd be quite hard for a left outlet to get that. The only place you can ever get that is the union, or usually can get that is the union, but then the unions bring with it a whole other political baggage that you don't want anything to do with. And I think that's why Rabble.ca, which does get quite a bit, it actually has a fairly significant budget, doesn't do this kind of stuff because it's that's another dimension to kind of restraining the politics that I don't think is good. Now at the debates, from what I can tell, I didn't watch all of them. I watched a pretty good chunk of the English one. I looked around a bit around the French one. There wasn't much about foreign policy. There's a little bit about militarism. Uh, the upside, the good thing on the debate was that Jagmeet Singh, on both the English and the French one, he pressed Carney to use the word genocide about Gaza. Uh, and he also was very clear, calling Poilievre's position disgusting, around UNRWA and otherwise on Palestine. So that was good. Uh, the This week, the couple things I think are on the Palestine repression side that are pretty. So so Radio Canada did a story about Neil Oberman, the lawyer who's been involved in all these attacks against anti-genocide, and including the lawyer behind um, the police pressing charges against me, he said that they will defund universities that engage in anti-Semitism, or basically universities that don't suppress anti-genocide protests. And so he says this. Harikana does a story about this 2 days ago, and then Poilievre is asked about it, and Poilievre doubles down, says that yes, and to some extent Poilievre is just repeating what he had said previously on defunding what he calls woke universities and woke institutions, and uh, and that are anti-Semitic. And but what now, of course, what when Poilievre said this previously, it's sort of like it's egregious, but it doesn't have that much kind of behind it. Now, of course, with what Donald Trump's done, it's this is a huge attack against academia in the States. That Trump's it's a war, it's an assault, and he's got these big long stories now, front page stories in the Washington Post and New York Times about this anti-Semitism committee that's basically just trying to like take control of universities. I mean, it's pretty egregious attacks against academic freedom. And now, of course, Harvard is sort of back, standing up a bit to Trump, and he's threatening over $2 billion in funding for Harvard, and this and that. So this is like a big deal. And so Oberman pushing that right now, and then Poilievre doubling down is a pretty big sign of Poilievre uh, going down the path of this Trumpism. And he's doing this. Poilievre, one of the things I find interesting is that Poilievre's doing this while he knows that being identified with Trump is his single biggest obstacle in the short term, at least, with winning. And so he's so kind of into the Zionist thing, and I think boxed in by Zionist forces, be that a Neil Oberman, be that a Melissa Lantsman, be that a Benjamin Netanyahu, and some of what Netanyahu's intervention on behalf of Poilievre last week, which we talked about last week, is all part of this. That Poilievre is still continuing down that path, even though that path, narrowly, there may be some electoral side to it of like playing to like the hard Zionist elements within the Jewish community, and so that might play electorally in some sense. But the association with Donald Trump that comes with doing this like this, that is not a political play for Poilievre. That is not a smart electoralist a strategy. But nonetheless, he continues down that pathway. Um, and so he said he's gonna defund universities. He's gonna kick out non-citizens who criticize Israel. There's one quote, I don't know where he's sending this. Poilievre says, after years of Carney Trudeau liberals, anti-Semitism is rampant in Canada. Synagogues are firebombed, Jewish businesses and schools are targeted, and anti-Semitic death threats ring out in Jewish communities. Instead of ending these vile acts of hate, the liberals have fueled them by funding terrorist organizations like UNRWA and allowed their MPs to spread hate about Israel. A Pierre Poilievre government will crack down on anti-Semitic hate and support Jewish Canadians' right to live and worship peacefully. So that's a pretty strong kind of language. Now, on the same vein, Mark Carney announced this week that he was going to make it a criminal offense to intentionally and willfully obstruct access to any place of worship, school, or community center. And that's tied into the whole bubble zones that are being pushed by Zionist forces in reaction to protests at community centers that are hosting IDF soldiers, or synagogues that are having those real estate fairs. And so Carney's he's not a little bit unclear exactly how it's gonna mean tangibly, but he's at least echoing that push. There was a protest in Toronto around the bubble zone that the Toronto City Council's discussing, and it was around, I think, correctly framed about not giving up our charter rights and freedoms, the rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Uh, we're doing a webinar tomorrow night that's partly about my case, but bigger around this question of right to protest genocide. And there was a story of in the Pivot, which is the French equivalent of Ricochet, about un lobby zioniste dans la boîte courriel de la ministre des Riz. So the higher education minister, uh, uh, of course, intervened with a couple colleges. We've discussed this previously. The CEGEPs, Dawson and uh, John Abbott, or the other one, I'm not sure, the other English one. But anyways, intervened in their curriculum because they had a curriculum course on Palestinian history, and and so their story shows that the CIJA was lobbying the minister on this issue. Uh, the at the debate, the CJPME had a stop arming Israel, a truck with messages around genocide and Canada's arming Israel and supporting Israel. It was kind of interesting to see. Uh, Another little bit on the Anna Ganey file. She skipped the local debate. So you had that Matthew Betherins who was criticizing me for challenging Anna Ganey, saying that I should go to her office or some other official area, even though leaving a meeting with Mark Carney should be viewed as an official area. But she's just kind of refused to participate in any of these debates. They know Stephen Guilbeault did that with something here too. He kind of ran out. The Palestine people are all over the different Stephen Guilbeault events or the debates in the riding. So it's making life difficult for a lot of Liberal MPs. Um, I think there's some things we should have done, could have done, had the energy to do in terms of more concerted campaigning, taking on one or two ridings, probably around the genocide and trying to defeat Liberal MPs. But I think we're past that. Um, but yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. And anyone's got questions or comments, and I'll make Laura a co-host. Oh, here we are. Go ahead, Laura. I think I've yeah.
Oh, okay, so Philip has his hand up. Philip, can you go ahead? Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. Uh, so I'm a member or belong to the Labor for Palestine in St. John, New Brunswick. And one of the things we were handing out information about the Vote Palestine pledge, and we've had some candidates participate in that, and actually going around the neighborhood and putting out some flyers. And I actually got to if I got there a little earlier at the Catholic church there, with handing those out, and I got some good responses. And I asked people, I said, this being Easter, maybe a question we need to ask ourselves is how would Jesus vote? And I got good responses from that. But when you were saying about Poilievre and Carney, how they're, looking at taking Trump's sort of stance as far as like people protesting and kicking people out of the country and whatnot, and curtailing freedoms. Maybe, I mean, it's a sad event, but the Pope was a very outspoken advocate for peace, especially the issue of Gaza, but world peace as a whole, and against taking stance against the arms industry and whatnot. Uh, it's like a week before the election. Why don't we launch a campaign to get the Pope sainthood? And if we can, there's like 323 candidates who signed the pledge for Palestine. So if they get elected, that's a miracle. That's one of the three miracles needed to become a saint. So maybe ignore these Zionists who, in my opinion, bastardize Jewish teachings, Christian teachings, and embrace, the message of Judaism, of Christianity, of Islam, and other religions of peace and tolerance. Let's get the Pope sainthood. I don't know.
Bravo, Philip. Good work.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to. I mean, I think we got a last little push, a weak push. Um, the Palestine issue has clearly entered it. I think Singh, I wrote a story about Singh referring to genocide in both debates, clearly going out of his way to bring it up, is is basically a response to all the activism. Singh has not been someone of principle on this issue, uh, but they sort of electoral calculations have just become so overwhelming, and there's sort of so much push within the party, around the party, that they kind of, and I think it matters. I think saying, in these the biggest political formats the country has, which of course election debates are, calling a genocide and politicizing it and seeing a benefit in aligning with the Palestine solidarity, I think is consequential. But yeah.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Hi. I just wanted to report on a couple things. Went to actually disrupted the all candidates meeting in New Glasgow for Central Nova. And unfortunately, I have a video of it, but I can't get it onto the device that you're on, so so I can't play. I could play a little audio if you want, but I had asked three questions, one about general human rights around the world, indigenous rights, one about climate and biodiversity loss, and one that I asked them to prioritize about genocide. And I had a very positive response from it was run by the Pictou County Chamber of Commerce, and they said that it was, looking like it would probably be asked, that it would be asked. And of course, I knew that might not happen. And of course, it was not asked. Not even anything about climate was asked. So they, just before they were going to do their closing comments, I just got up there and read the Lemkin Institute statement, which, as you said before, accuses Canada and Europe and the U.S. and Israel of perpetrating genocide. And I thought it was a really great statement. And then I read also the 5 demands of the Vote Palestine platform, not just the headlines, but the little bit more detailed demands, and had a arms embargo flyer as well. That I said, now Mark Carney says that we have an arms embargo with Israel and we don't, and we need one, and I had on a cloak that says "Stop Genocide, Ecocide" on the front of it, and "Free Palestine" on the back, but I don't think you could really see. I was facing the audience. And yeah, it was interesting. One of the candidates, this independent guy, was clapping for me in the background. And the audience was, I'm not sure, people were clapping, but I think they might have been trying to drown me out. And the friend who was filming said that some people in the audience were really saying, "Go, get her out of here, get her out of here." But then there was another woman in the back of the room saying, let her speak, really loudly, which I could hear. And of course the security and the organizers gathered around and tried to get me to shut up and get off the stage, and told me I had to leave after I sat down again. But then eventually, and said, we'll have to call the police. But then they said, one of the organizers came and said, well, if you stay seated, you can stay. And I said, I'm sitting. So they let me
Thanks
stay.
for those actions, Catherine. We're gonna have to move on to some other questions, but thank you for taking those actions. Appreciate it. Okay. Eve, do you want to say
Yeah,
anything?
well, I think it's fascinating that there's so many different ways in which the political discussion is constrained, right? So you have the Chamber of Commerce that then gets to control what questions get asked, and so you put questions forward, and they just, they isolate them, and then if you then, fall out of line with the official way of functioning by, sort of disrupting because the questions aren't being asked, then now you look bad or you're whatever, right? Even at that low of a level, the whole parameters of the discussion are constrained by power. I mean, in part by the Chamber of Commerce, and it's not obviously a very big Chamber of Commerce, but controlling the debate, and that, yeah, whatever, how that all, like, you know uh excludes challenges to dominant thinking. But
Go ahead, Emily.
Hey, Catherine, a clap is a clap is a clap. So take it as
yeah.
an endorsement. I'll just be quick. I posted it on the dialogue here, but I don't know if people picked it up. But I left an email. Ken Collier can be contacted. So in light of your conversation, Eve, about getting media and developing our own media, blah, blah, blah. So this is an online national conference. It's happening on Saturday, August 26th at Pacific time. But anyway, but Ken Collier, I left the email for Ken up there. So basically, it's to look at socialist action, regaining control of the working class, international relations, socialist organizing for working class sovereignty as opposed to bourgeois liberal version promoted in the media. Agenda includes education, communication, and discussion of a socialist manifesto. So I'm excited about it. Ken is an old old lefty like me. And so the email is there. Sorry, I don't know how to post the thing here, the, URL type thing. But if you contact Ken, he'll send you the information to how to log on.
Thanks,
So
Emily. Thank you. Go. Okay, go ahead, Hans. Hans,
All
I think
candidates meeting,
go ahead.
all candidates meeting is similarly, questions are filtered through the mediator, and you won't be able to ask questions from the floor. To be determined on Thursday, I think. Um, the point I was trying to raise was Saturday, April 19th, happens to be the 82nd anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And for some reason or other, I was fantasizing that Julianne Hazelwood, CBC newscaster on the World Today, would somehow make reference to that. But of course, no one in the media referred to it. Ironically, the German International Service had a documentary on Polish Jewry and their persecution, the ghettoization. But it was in two parts. So the second part, dealing with the uprising, was not there. My own little bit of activism, I was postering about Palestine until my printer ink ran out. But I did see the extremes. Some rabid Zionist was hell-bent to stop me from postering. And actually, I had run out of posters anyway, but he told me I should be gassed.
No.
I should be gassed in a gas chamber. I didn't go quite that far with my analogy of the Warsaw Ghetto, but uh, there are really rabid hate mongers that this was the first time I experienced one face to face. He spat at me, um, and uh, luckily we didn't come to any blows. Anyway, I I just the point I'm making is how singularly isolated these people are because somebody in the car nearby said, told them to back off, to leave me alone. Anyway, my little bit of activism. Thank you.
Good for you, Hans. Thanks.
Yeah, it's pretty wild after the slaughter of 19 months. There's still people in Toronto that are like so bold that will, I mean, that's to me, that's just totally remarkable. So,
Hey, Steve, are you hearing a lot of the same arguments we heard in the Canadian election and the US election where people, so I was supporting the Greens, but it's so many people making the argument that Trump was so bad, you just had to bite the bullet and go for Harris. Are you hearing that argument made a lot about in Canada now that Poilievre and the Conservatives are going to be so bad, so aggressive, both on Palestine and everything else, that you kind of have to bite the bullet and go to Liberal? Or are you hearing that a lot?
yeah,
Oh,
I mean, I'm not engaged in that. I kind of avoid that, but it plays out so much differently in terms of like the most places where it's there's not that many places where it's a conservative versus a liberal as the likely battle, right? Because it comes down to each riding. So
Mhm.
like where I am, like I just voted today. I voted for the NDP candidate. I feel a little bit bad I didn't vote for Adrien, who's with the Communist Party, who I know I've done stuff with, and he's not going to win. Nima Machouf has a small chance of winning. There's no chance a conservative, like the Communist Party and the Marxist-Leninist Party might get almost as much as the Conservative Party candidate in my riding. It's a lot of places, there's some places it's a conservative versus an NDP battle. And then there's like places like Paul Manley, from what I understand his riding in Nanaimo there, it's a green versus conservative as the likely. But yeah, that the big picture, there are people making that argument that you just have to fall in behind Carney. And I don't particularly like if I was in a riding where it was like a clear conservative liberal, I might vote for the liberal. Like I
Mhm.
wouldn't exclude doing that. So I don't have a problem with lesser evilism because I don't think that I think the Canadian dynamic is very different than the U.S. in the sense that the NDP, as bad as the NDP is, it's not the Democrat. It's not,
Mhm.
and it's the Democratic Party, right? Like and so there's yeah, but certainly there's lots of those arguments being made. I don't. I don't have a problem with voting um, strategically. Like in my case, if it was still that if there was still money that a party got, right? I may have voted Communist Party just to give the Communist Party the $5 for each vote. Like in provincial, there's money. Each vote gets you a small amount of money that can sustain. Like the Green Party Quebec, the way they're able to sustain is they actually get a decent amount of money that that's why Alex Terrell can keep being like full-time kind of leader of the party and stuff like that. But yeah.
Stanley, I just saw your hand go up again. Did you have another question?
yeah, just a quick in response to your question.
Yeah.
I'm in Alberta, and in Alberta and BC, my friends and colleagues and people are who voted NDP, and there's a good chance that strong likelihood we're going to have an NDP government in our next provincial government. But the NDPers in that I know of in Alberta and BC, and particularly Vancouver Island,
Mhm.
are going toward Liberal. They're voting Liberal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though they've been lifelong socialists or communists, they're voting Liberal.
But people need to be very careful that it's like the right call in terms of strategic voting. That's essential. To not be strategic voting in a non-strategic way. That's a
Oh
really
yeah, for sure.
important
Yeah, yeah,
that I
yeah.
assume people on this call understand, but it seems like some people don't understand. In most places where it's a sitting NDP MP, that the strategic vote is to vote, of course, for that NDP MP. But yeah.
Okay. Uh, Catherine, did you have another question? Go ahead. Can you unmute, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to say also that the Tatamgush Farmers Market, a friend and I were pamphleting there, and they told us to leave. This is the second time they've been told to leave from there for pamphleting, and we didn't. But now they're going to have a meeting there's a whole Creamery Square Association to decide what to do about. We turned into protesters when we were just pamphleters. So this is
You
Toronto.
almost for sure have the right to you almost for sure have the right. There's a legal decision going back to the 90s at a mall around a strike where they won when I think when all the Supreme Court they won the right to leaflet in the mall. So like a pretty what would be perceived as quite private property kind of situation. You still, it's not a blanket, but you still usually have the right to leaflet. Just to
Oh,
yeah.
thank you. That's great. This was in the parking lot. We weren't in the building even,
Yeah.
but good to know.
You have to look at some of those, the specifics, but probably you have that right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one last question, Eve? Is Canada participating in the U.S. slaughter of Yemenis?
Well, they were officially part of there was a group that whatever that coalition early on, and there was like 5 Canadian forces that were, seconded to there was like was it 5 countries or 7 countries that were part of that it was initial U.S. British bombing, and then there was like 5 other countries, and Canada was one of those 5. It was a pretty minimal number that was initially announced. I don't know if more. I mean, they certainly are in other ways in the sense that like, if NORAD is involved and different Canadians deployed with US units and stuff like that. But yeah, officially they are not very much is and probably more than we know.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Eve. I think that's it.
Take care, everyone.